Ancient landmarks are gateways to the past that provide priceless archaeological information about eras of history we know very little about. And at a basic level, the temples and monuments left behind by civilizations who lived centuries before us inspire excitement, intrigue, and imagination. So, today we're going to take a look at some surprising facts about ancient landmarks. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other landmarks you would like to hear about. Okay, now you can start whistling the Indiana Jones theme. The Temple of Kukulkan, also known as El Castillo, was built in the Yucatan in Chichen Itza around 600 CE. Chichen Itza's name is believed to translate from the Mayan term for the mouth at the well of the water magicians. Not only does this sound like a particularly successful Vegas residency, but the location actually lives up to its name by displaying a seemingly magical spectacle for visitors every spring and fall equinox. The Mayans were seriously into astronomy, and they placed the temple in the perfect position for the sun to create an optical illusion around March 20th and September 22nd, or in other words, the equinoxes. Picture this. As the sun's rays hit the temple on those specific dates, shadows cast across the pyramid-shaped temple resemble a serpent slithering down the sides of the structure. What's more, clapping in front of the Kukulkan pyramid creates an echo that mimics a serpent's chirp. It's a spectacular display of ancient cutting-edge special effects. Bring some Raisinets. If there's one thing we all know about the Great Wall of China, it's that it's pretty great. But it's also not one linear structure. Rather, it's a series of different sections that combine to stretch for thousands of miles. And though the first bricks of the oldest sections were laid in the 3rd century BCE, most of the wall wasn't actually constructed until the Ming Dynasty of 1368 to 1644 CE. And you thought road work was slow. But while you might assume that because the wall has stood for so many ages, it's impervious, that isn't the case. After being subjected to centuries of harsh weather conditions, plant growth, heavy tourist traffic, and at least one visit by Richard Nixon, almost a third of the wall has disappeared. Over the centuries, heavy foot traffic and vandalism have eroded portions of the wall. The occasional visitor sometimes decides their home could use a few of the bricks from the famous structure, and just snags a few. I mean, there's so many, who's gonna miss a couple, right? In fact, so much of the Great Wall of China is now missing that its measured length varies from around 5,500 miles to just over 13,000 miles, depending on whether the missing sections are included in the total sum. This sort of thing has left some of the towers so fragile that a sharp wind or heavy rain could cause them to topple during a storm, a problem accelerated by overgrown plants. Hey, it was built to keep the Huns out. Nobody said anything about the wind. While the pyramids known as Cheops, Khafre, and Mykerinos are widely recognized, they're really just the tip of the iceberg, or a pyramid. Because the fact is, the western bank of the Nile is home to over 130 other pyramids. Built between 2550 and 2490 BCE, the gigantic structures have experienced centuries of erosion, but they're still standing. Visitors to the pyramids in ancient times would not have seen the 2.5 to 15-ton building blocks that we see today. Instead, they would have seen these iconic buildings shimmering with light, because once upon a time, most of them were covered in limestone that reflected the sun's rays. While that was undoubtedly a sight to behold, it was presumably also kind of a pain in the ass for everyone stuck in afternoon traffic. Unfortunately, that original casing has been almost totally destroyed due to the combination of earthquakes and subsequent political rulers removing pieces of the pyramids to build other structures. Limestone doesn't grow on trees. The Kuwatal Mosque in Delhi, India, was built in 1192 CE. It's in ruins now, but that hasn't stopped tourists from continuing to visit each year. But those tourists are really there to see a much older artifact, an iron pillar built in the 4th century CE that stands in front of the ruins and hasn't rusted in 1,600 years. Saying they don't make them like they used to would be something of an understatement. But while the relatively perfect condition of the pillar has fascinated and confused historians, scientists, and archaeologists for centuries, there's nothing magical about it. There's a plain old boring chemical explanation for the pillar's preservation. The pillar, which is about 7 meters high and 40 centimeters in diameter at its base, was built by hammering multiple pieces of hot iron together to form a cylindrical shape through a process known as forge welding. Because the process requires numerous selections of steel, the pillar's composition varies greatly. And while modern steel holds about the same carbon content as the ancient pillar, the pillar's phosphorus levels are over 10 times higher than modern steel's. Experts believe that the high phosphorus content within the ancient steel caused a protective film of crystalline iron hydrogen phosphate to form on the pillar's surface, essentially protecting the column from the elements. Kinda makes you wonder why they don't make all steel that way. Cambodians are so proud of the temples collectively referred to as Angkor Wat that the ancient buildings are featured on the country's flag. That's when you know you've made it as a building. Built between 802 and 1220 CE, the site is a wonder to behold. But due to its fragile nature, Cambodian officials limit how many visitors may walk through the temple's halls each year. They also charge a crazy price for filmmakers who want to shoot there. For example, in 2000, producers of the action blockbuster Lara Croft Tomb Raider, starring Angelina Jolie, approached Som Sokan, director of cinema for the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts for Cambodia, for permission to film at the monument. After negotiations, the filmmakers had to agree to pay $10,000 a day to utilize the sacred space. Something's getting raided there, and it ain't no tomb. The Cambodian government also had some pretty firm restrictions in place to make sure nothing disrespectful goes on at the monument. For example, the Tomb Raider production had to agree not to use guns or film graphic scenes within the temple's walls. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which is in modern-day Turkey, was really big. In fact, it was once estimated to be 4 times larger than the Parthenon, which is itself fairly large. Commissioned by the Lydian king Croesus between 560 and 547 BCE, and named after the Greek goddess of hunting, the temple became one of the 7 wonders of the world, making it the envy of other temples everywhere. I mean, have you heard? It's the size of 4 Parthenons. I mean, it's trying so hard. Unfortunately, in 356 BCE, a guy named Erostratos intentionally burned the temple to the ground in a weird attempt to make himself famous. The Ephesians rebuilt it, only this time they made it even grander and more skillfully decorated with art than before, which would only make it more depressing when the temple was destroyed again in 1262 during a Goth invasion. And we don't mean they were attacked by Evanescence. Though the Ephesians were intent on keeping the Temple of Artemis as the ancient city's focal point, it was destroyed for a final time in 401 CE. After that, they threw in the towel. Today, in addition to the temple's most updated foundation that remains, archaeological digs have uncovered remnants of Croesus' temple, a temple of the 3rd century BCE, and 3 smaller temples buried beneath the ruins. So yeah, evidently they were just stacking these things on top of each other. After centuries of study, you'd think that scientists, historians, and archaeologists would be able to determine for certain why the ancient Salisbury, England site known as Stonehenge was created. But they can't, which is something you should bring up if you ever want to take them down a peg or two. What we do know is that Stonehenge took over a millennium to complete, so it wasn't exactly a rush job. We also know the ancient structure contains both artificially shaped massive Cenozoic silicrete stones, as well as smaller blue stones that had to have been transported from as far as 200 miles away. That is a long way to carry gigantic rocks, in the days before F-150s. Construction began on the massive stone circle in 3000 BCE, and wasn't completed until 1520 BCE. And the ancient people who first dug the initial earth bank and ditch around 3100 BCE left no written records to explain why they did it, or to identify the site's intended purpose. Whatever the case, experts believe that the first larger stones were moved into position and erected between 2400 and 2200 BCE, and builders continued to add smaller rocks surrounding the original formation from 1930 to 1600 BCE. So really they just kept tinkering with it, kind of like George Lucas. First conceptualized somewhere between 70 and 72 CE, the Flavian Theater, now more popularly known as the Colosseum, was fully constructed and ready to house entertainment by 80 CE. To celebrate the occasion, Emperor Titus organized a full 100 days of live theatrics and gladiatorial battles, and presumably a few 5-cent beer nights. There's also a showcase of live exotic animals. In fact, ancient Roman culture had a tradition of bringing animals from all over the world into their arenas to create a bloody spectacle. And they certainly weren't about to start skimping for the opening of the big new Colosseum. Lions, rhinos, cheetahs, crocodiles, hippos, elephants, and monkeys were transported from Africa to meet their end in the arena. Bears were transported from Scotland, and leopards, tigers, and panthers were acquired from Asia to fight amongst themselves and the chosen venatores, who were slaves and prisoners of war that battled against the animals for the crowd's entertainment. Though some animals like zebras and ostriches were deemed too docile to put up a fight worth watching, they were used to pull chariots during the games and generally whacked once their races were complete. Over the course of the 100-day showcase, historian Cassius Dio estimated that more than 9,000 animals were slaughtered for entertainment. While it's not really the resting place of the Holy Grail, there is an ornate and intricately carved ancient temple in the middle of the desert near modern-day Jordan. The mountainside temple seen at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is actually located at Petra, a city of rock dwellings and tombs built by the Nabateans over 2,000 years ago on the site believed to be where the Israelite leader Moses hit a rock to make a stream of water burst forth. The mainly nomadic Nabateans first established themselves there near the end of the 4th century BCE, when they were still heavily tied to their Arabic roots. However, as they immersed themselves into the South Arabian frankincense and myrrh business, Petra became a thriving city with a mix of Arabic and Hellenistic influence. Establishing trade routes from India all the way to Rome, the city thrived before it was eventually annexed by Rome in 106 CE. As the Romans established different trade routes, the city of Petra eventually declined. Way to screw it up, Rome. Petra is so remote that visitors must travel through a 328-foot deep gorge to reach it, which is only 10 feet wide in some points. But the adventurers that do make it through the seemingly uninhabitable terrain are met with the awe-inspiring sight of Al Khazna, or Treasury, that Indiana Jones fans should recognize from the film. So what do you think? Which of these ancient landmarks would you most like to visit? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.